cerebrospinal fluid coming out of his left ear. And it made me realize that he probably had an epidural bleed. For those of you in the audience who don't know what that is, that means he had a bleed in his brain and he probably had about an hour to live without emergent care. Here's the problem. There wasn't care on the island. This island had 2 doctors, 1 clinic, an almost broken x-ray machine, a very broken stretcher, no CAT scan. We couldn't take the helicopter to the neighboring island because it was dusk and not safe. And there was no plane. The only commercial plane of the day being intervened and our BlackBerry worked. We got in touch with CNN, who worked with the Greek government, and they sent a military plane so that we could air evacuate Emmanuel from Ikaria. I accompanied him on that very long 1-hour flight. And when I could finally delegate my sense of responsibility to the flight surgeon, it was the first time in my career that the words health and healthcare were no longer synonymous. The newspaper that covered this story, called dhamma, had a quote in there that I will translate, but I'll say it in Greek first. It says, "Zoume poli ke malon katatihi," which means we live a long time, but it's probably just because of good luck. But I think that newspaper actually underestimated the reason for the longevity in Ikaria. The poverty, the remoteness, and the need for self-reliance actually naturally created a place that gave them of life. Well, it's highly doubtful that many of us, or the majority of us, would go to Okinawa or Sardinia or Loma Linda or Ikaria, even though it's quite beautiful. I'd recommend that you go there. And I also doubt that any of us would voluntarily put ourselves in a state of poverty in order to have this long life. So the real question is, how do we maintain our current wonderful, resource-rich lives, but yet give ourselves some of these 12 years back? And that's the question that Dan set out to answer in these city makeovers. Can we reverse engineer our own lives to match some of the events that bring life to these other places in the world? And the answer to that is yes. And where he started was in Albert Lea, Minnesota. Albert Lea is about 70 miles south of Minneapolis. It's a town of about 18,000 people. And he selected that town for a few reasons. One, it was small enough to make a difference, but large enough to get community support. But even more importantly, because he put out an RFP process to select this town, he saw from the application process that everyone from the public officials to the businesses to the people themselves were very motivated to create change. And so in late 2009, he set off to make over Albert Lea, Minnesota. So where do you start? Well, you start by looking at a life radius. Most of what we do occurs within about 20 miles of where we live. And so the focus of the city makeover is looking at the built environment within that 20 miles so that it can be restructured. And the place that it has to start is by looking at the built environment itself, which of course is very much controlled by the budgets and elected officials and public policymakers. The questions that come up are, is it an environment that's friendly for pedestrians? Is it an environment that promotes walking? And we've heard what some of the advantages would be to that with the prior speaker. This is after picture. You can see the traffic lights that make it safe to cross, the new bike lanes, a shelter so that if somebody does wait for the bus, that they're protected from the weather. And you can see some extra greenery in the area as well. Also a 3-mile walking path put around the lake that is so beautiful. And all of that built infrastructure promotes creating more of a social environment. So with the addition of an environment that promoted walking and being outside, the Blue Zones team helped out called what the Japanese call mawais, but they socialize together. You can see this group of seniors here that are walking together. But what was also fun to observe was that there were parents and children who normally took the school bus together, or parents put their children on the school bus, and they just created a walking school bus. So they started walking to school, and that was a walking school bus Moai. After you create a social network, you also have to look at the building environment. And as I said earlier, there was wonderful participation from the school network. You also have to look at the building environment. And as I said earlier, there was wonderful participation from the school, very cooperative in putting the less healthy foods on top shelves or lower shelves where they would be less tempting and more inconvenient to reach, and put the healthy type foods right at eye level. Menus marked the menu items that were Blue Zones consistent, and the vending machines, and particularly those in schools, were either completely restocked or marked so that people could make healthier choices. And then, of course, in order to create any change, the change has to come from the individuals themselves. And so that was the goal, was to get as many people in Albert Lea engaged as possible. It started with a big kickoff, and if anyone has ever met Dan or read his books, you know how much energy he can bring to an audience. And that 25% of the population of Albert Lea getting actively engaged and signing a Blue Zones pledge. In order to help people take those individual steps to make their own lives healthier, they went into their own homes. We went into their own homes and taught them how to reorganize their own pantry and their own refrigerator, junk food in the pantries out of sight or in the drawers. And because purpose and giving back is so important, the Blue Zones team organized bringing together community organizations that needed help with the people of Albert Lea who wanted to help, and brought them together so that it was so easy for people to give back and contribute and share and have purpose. And the results were, according to so many reports and accounts, just absolutely stunning. The people that participated lost a total of 12,000 pounds. The city workers typically decreased their healthcare costs by 40%. But what was most important about this event in Albert Lea, which took about 6 to 9 months, is that we learned that it's scalable. And the Blue Zones team took this same city makeover concept to Fort Worth, Texas. But I'd like to make sure that you don't think that you don't have to wait for...
All right. So Sam, what is the Blue Zone Project?
Helping to try and create better living conditions, better living environments in order to provide longer life, better way of life, more active without having to work out at a gym in a closed, small radius in order for it to be achievable. But the main thing is that the area and the people that it is done in have to be determined and willing to change, and they're ultimately the ones that create the change.
You've been taking notes.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of typing over there.
Collectively, they lost 12,000 pounds with people involved, and city workers decreased health costs by 40%. And they learned that it is very scalable, because Albert Lea was a test. And this test seems to be their middle way of attaining that better living capability and environment without having to live in poverty as well.
taking forever for all these things to load, so I decided to introduce you all to the Blue Zone Project, something that I paid attention to years ago. Years ago, I was and the study of happiness, positive psychology. On or around somewhere in 2013, 2012, the economy at that time, I think, was going through a depression, an economic depression, depression in totality as a whole. And of course, when people are depressed and everyone is depressed, I walked into Barnes and Noble and I'm like, what? Study of happiness. Okay. Well, if everyone's depressed, maybe I should study happiness. Maybe somewhere down the line, I'll become a little bit more happy myself. Um, and thus I did for those years to come. That's all I did was focus on positive psychology, the study of happiness, which is like funny to some certain people, just because they're like, what? Do you not know how to be happy? And then, of course, certain people in their minds could say, well, my definition of happiness is getting a car, getting a new car, getting a new bed, a new house, a bigger something that has to do with materialism. And we think we know what happiness is. We think we know when we, in fact, will have done Lord knows how long, years and years of research. One must have grave respect for research because it helps us get closer, if not the truth itself, on a particular subject and matter. This is important for everyone in this class and all of the students with the School of Chi Taoist because eventually this is something that you have to come across and sink your teeth into it. Convince yourself to constantly and always go back to the study of positive psychology, the study of happiness, longevity, because if not, you would go back to all the negative stuff, studying stuff that don't work. You can easily go back to or the so the stuff up, out, exercise, eat right, study, and just look at the whole science of it all. At the current time on Coursera. Let me see if I can pull it up. Let me see if it's still there. If my course is still there. But Professor Santos, I think she's from Yale or Harvard, one of the two, that offered this course for free. Very profound course. It was like a refresher for me because I've already studied it way long ago. I was able to log in. Let me see if my course is still in progress. Let me see here. The science of well-being. So this course should be looked at a $2,000 course, free for us. And it is a 10-week long. See all these guys down here? Martin Seligman, Sonia Lumborski, Mihaly, Daniel Gilbert, Robert Emmons. I haven't read Robert Emmons, but half of these authors I've done research and came across their names before. literally this is golden diamond in your life. Let me see if we can get a couple of things.
Well, welcome everybody to the science of well-being, what psychological science says about the good life. I'm going to kind of give a quick introduction to the stuff about the course, and then we'll get to our particular topic of today. But I kind of wanted to start because this is a bit of colleges, but we welcome you anyway. And I thought it's cool to kind of welcome you by noting that you are starting this kind of interesting new journey. And I mean new in a couple different senses. One is that this is kind of a new thing for Yale. Never before at Yale have they taught a course on the kind of science of psychology and sort of practice of how to be happy. So it's kind of new for Yale. It's sort of new for Yale's online courses. Unlike most of the online courses, we're sitting here in my living room chatting with guys in this kind of comfy space. It's kind of a new way to think about how we teach people who aren't at Yale. And it's also a new journey for all of you. The hope is that this isn't going to be like an ordinary like kind of class or lecture series for you. This is the kind of thing that we really hope can actually change your life in a real way. Not just by teaching you new content and new information, but by really changing your habits. That's sort of the goal. So welcome to this new journey. If you're scared of the journey, you don't want to be here, you can take off, they'll shut the cameras off and cut you out of it. So wait, all right. But the new journey is kind of cool. The goal of the class is to do two separate things. One is a thing that's kind of typical of classes here at Yale, where we're going to teach you some content. We're going to teach you about the science of happiness, all these cool new findings that the field of psychology has. But the second part, which is a little bit different, which is the kind of journey part, is that we're not just going to do stuff on the science of happiness. We're going to think about the practice of happiness too. One of the things we're going to learn is about this information about what makes you happy isn't enough to actually make you happy. You actually have to put those things into practice. By being part of this course, you're kind of signing on to do that hard part too. You're not going to have homework in the way of readings or that kind of stuff, but you are going to have homework if you want this stuff to stick. You're just kind of thinking about your habits and that stuff too. And in part because of that, we're really hoping, because I'm a scientist, not just to kind of give you this content, but I really kind of want to see if this works. The goal is to scale this up to a really large course at Yale. You guys are kind of the pilot program of this. I want that to work. And so one of your pieces of homework for tonight, if you guys are interested in doing so, is to actually help me measure whether or not this stuff is working. And we're going to do that by actually measuring your happiness levels. We're going to take that sometimes having its effect. We're going to try to look at that. Okay, so this is actually having its effect. We're going to try to look at that. Okay, so what is the course about? Well, you're signed on for kind of 5 quick lectures here in my home. And we're going to go through a couple different topics. Today's topic is going to be about misconceptions about happiness, the things you think make you happy but don't actually. So all of your expectations are so bad. Basically, I think what you'll see is many of the things we think are going to make us happy don't. And so why are we not accurate about the kinds of things that are going to make us happy? Why are we seeking out these things that aren't going to help us? Third, we're going to sort of jump to the stuff that actually really does increase happiness. And as is the case in a lot of like, BuzzFeed articles, the answer may surprise you. So weird. From there, we're going to kind of broaden to say, okay, if that's the stuff that's going to be one of the things that we should be get into more homework and more habits for you guys to engage in. And then the fifth thing is going to take this even broader, not just thinking about putting these strategies into practice for you yourself in terms of your own personal happiness, but how can you put these in practice more broadly? How can we use this stuff to like
Yale University professor, something that you all should take really seriously. Throughout this week, you done taking notes, Sam? You're taking notes about that? Pen and paper, take notes. It's better. This is all the younger students that have you guys aware of these type of studies in the past? Sunk your teeth into it before, like in details?
Not like a course on it, but
or any books on happiness where they present research recommendations.
different techniques, different reasons why we are unhappy, things like that. But not a an actual course like that or.
So for the young students who have been with me this past 2 months, and regretfully, Eric could not be here until later, 2 o'clock. But they all got to see, hopefully they've gathered data based on what they've seen and experienced in regards to eating, cooking, out and about, creating things, doing things that they like to do, exploring new things. All summarizes the actual practice of happiness. What it is and what, as we interview students who came in and we interviewed them and we asked them, and they were very stuck and set in their own ways. Stubborn, really stubborn in their old ways. And when I give my podcast the best available science, this is what it means. This is one of them, using the best available science in regards to living well, aging gracefully. For those who have a hard time, for example, we have students like Stephen who literally kill themselves at the gym, not knowing how. And by the time they get to the chiropractor's office, they have to teach them, okay, this is the way you should do this. All right, the scientific aspect of that. When I had my meniscus issue in my right knee, and the doctor was like, okay, go get some x-rays. And I'm not sure it was MRI or something like that. And they were able to see it. And like, you see this thing right here? I'm like, things. And I'm like, how do we fix it again? And the doctor was like, well, let's first try physical therapy. And well, I was very resistant to that. And I'm like, what do you mean? Oh, okay. And I think I went to the first physical therapy where the girl asked me a bunch of questions and how did it happen and how did you fall, and then gave me a bunch of printouts and then showed me a bunch of, and yeah, that I went home very depressed because I'm like, what you want me to do? Okay, give me a bunch of bands, a bunch of rubber bands, and told me to do these stretches and walk around with a cane. So I went to Florida, or the piece them were told me to lie down. This is what you're gonna do, and then both foot, and then heels up, and I mean all these were like very baby stuff. And then I'm like, what? Why couldn't I think of this? I was like, really? I can do this at home? And of course, I had the option to do it at home, stats and everything like that. And then the band is wrapped there, and I'm like stretching, a lot of stretching. It took up an hour of my life for 6-7 weeks. I think it was twice a week for like 6 weeks, and I got well and made a full recovery. And it changed the way how I thought about stretches and exercise, that the science did in fact work. And then what reminded me of that was these guys have master's degree and doctorates of physical therapy.